Everyone, welcome to an episode of Exploring the Arts Around Us. I'm Monica Merrell, your host. In this series, we've been exploring various art forms, and I've been introducing you to some of the local residents who are creating and celebrating those art forms. Now, in the past, we've talked about the Washington Symphony Orchestra, and we'll mention them today. But within that context, I wanted to introduce another specific mode of creating, and that is musical conducting. Conducting is the art of directing a large group of instrumentalists or vocalists in a simultaneous musical performance while using gestures. I'm sure many of you have seen a conductor. I've invited Dr. Susan Medley, Director of Choral Activities and Professor of Music at Washington and Jefferson College, to be with me today. She is going to be the guest conductor for the WSO's March Concert Fun and Games. So welcome, Dr. Medley.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Good, good. Thank you very much for coming. Let's start out a little bit by just giving our audience a little of your background. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, I trained as a conductor at University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music. Prior to that, I had a major in music education as an undergrad and taught public school for a while. I'm a pianist. My master's is in accompanying, and then I just kind of fell in love with choral music and conducting in general and decided to get a doctorate. I really wanted to teach college choral music, so I did the doctorate in conducting. Worked at Carnegie Hall in New York City for a little while. I was the Associate Director of Education there, and then got the job at Washington and Jefferson College, and I've been here ever since, 20 years now.
Wow, that's quite impressive. So you said you play piano. Are you also a vocalist?
I am. I did my major was piano and my minor was voice.
Okay.
And choral conducting was a great kind of marriage of those two things, because as a pianist, you look at everything that's going on, and as a vocalist, you need to be able to coach your choir to get the kinds of sounds that you want. And I did it, as I said, I did an accompanying major and have played for literally thousands of voice lessons and have heard what makes voices change when the voice teacher works with them.
So it sounds like you actually started mostly as a conductor for choral groups.
Yes.
And then moved into the orchestra situation.
Yes.
Now, I just want to clear. So the WSO on occasion has had guest conductors in the past. We have not ditched Dr. Eyecatch. Hugo Eyecatch will be back in May, but every now and then we like to give him a break. And so when we decided to do a guest conductor, and you were so close with W&J and obviously know about the symphony, we were so delighted that you accepted. I mean, it seems like it's going to be a wonderful concert, and I think that it'll be a very interesting experience for our musicians as well as the audience to have a female conductor in place. So your bio on the W&J website is very impressive. You've traveled extensively conducting. Talk about that a little bit.
I have. I've been very fortunate in that I have gotten to both go other places to conduct myself and take my groups. I'm still primarily a choral conductor, although I do conduct some orchestras and lots of choral orchestral works. But I have taken choirs to, most recently we were in Italy and performed at St. Mark's Basilica in Venice, which was an amazing experience. We've been to Germany and Austria, the Czech Republic, performed incredible places. I mean, when you're performing in Stephansdom, St. Stephen's Cathedral in Vienna, Mozart was married there. Schubert was a choir boy there. I mean, you feel all these ghosts in that space. It's really amazing.
How are you received there, though? Do foreigners think you're like an interloper coming in and playing their music?
No, they really appreciate it, and they welcome choirs from all over the world and really appreciate it. It puts a lot more pressure on us. For instance, if it's a choir and we're singing in Austria and we're singing in German, our German had better be really, really good. We did a whole program of Italian music in Italy, so we had to make sure that Italian was quite good.
See, that would be something I would have never thought about, having to actually be a linguist, be able to master languages in order to go abroad and perform.
Yes.
Because as you said, they have a very high standard and they expect to hear what they're supposed to hear.
That's exactly right. And it's interesting because although I'm not fluent in those languages, but as part of our training, we study the diction to know how to look at a phrase and be able to make the sounds that, so that it sounds the way it's supposed to. And that's one of the big differences in working with an orchestra and a choir. In a choir, you have the words that are telling the audience what is going on. I mean, even if it's in a foreign language, we have the translation. As an orchestra, you have to create that story with the sounds of the instruments as far as what is going on. So it's been a lot of fun to work with just the orchestra, not even a choral orchestral work, but just the orchestra to conceive the interpretation of the pieces.
So let's talk a little bit about the actual kind of nuts and bolts. How do you learn how to conduct an orchestra or conduct a choral group? Obviously there's got to be some training. What does that involve?
Well, I think for me, the inspiration to learn was being part of a very good choir and having very good conductors as role models, and to watch them to see how they got the effects that they got. And then you start studying conducting in college as an undergraduate, and you learn the basic gestures. And the way to really become an effective conductor, it's such a strange profession, because every other thing in music that you do, you hear results immediately. If I'm practicing the piano, I can hear what I'm doing. If I'm practicing voice, if you're a flutist, you hear what. Conducting, if you're not in a rehearsal, while you are learning the scores of the music that you're going to, you spend a lot of time in front of a mirror going like this.
And the music has to be, I guess, in your mind.
It's in your mind, yes.
Well, that's an interesting thing. I never even thought about that.
Yes, I'm teaching conducting right now, and I told my students, I said, it's a very unusual feeling, but you have to spend a lot of time looking in a mirror and analyzing, where is that beat? Am I too low? What kind of result? Am I really rigid? If you conduct too high, for instance, that encourages very shallow breathing. And if you're conducting instrumentalists, brass players who have to get that big breath, wind players, singers who have to get a deep breath, if you're conducting too high, that shallow breathing is not what you want. So you want to put your pattern a little bit lower so it encourages this kind of a breath.
Wow.
There are all kinds of psychological things.
It was interesting to me when I was doing a little research for the program that apparently conducting started back in the medieval times, and it was mostly with choral groups, and was mostly in church. We know a lot of things started in church, but that's when they first began to have someone in front of the singers. And they did hands mostly, and then they introduced a paper roll or then a baton of some kind. And that continued, and they said around the 18th century is when they started having someone who was actually part of the orchestra, the concert master, which was a violin player, or else a pianist, like you, then get up and conduct while they're playing, which to me would seem like a very difficult thing to do, because you have your own part to worry about, much less everybody else.
Exactly.
And it wasn't until the 19th century that the whole concept of a separate conductor in front of the orchestra took place. Does that sound about right? Did I get my history right?
Yes, no, that's very good. Yes, and often with an orchestra, you would have the concertmaster leading. Sometimes they would stand, sometimes they would be seated and, kind of cue the orchestra that way. There still are some orchestras that play without a conductor. But it was kind of during the Romantic era when orchestras really became large.
Right.
And then it just became impractical for everybody to see somebody seated leading them. And you did need somebody who knew what everybody was doing, who could get up and conduct. Early on, though, when they had there was a baton, not a baton that we think of now. They would use a staff, and they would kind of beat it on the ground to keep the time. And yes, and Jean-Baptiste Lully, who was a composer and conductor, was beating time for his orchestra. and he drove the stick through his foot, got gangrene, and died.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. So I always
conducting is hazardous to
it
your
is,
health.
yes,
It can be
it's a
hazardous.
dangerous profession. But I think that's probably when they moved to the baton that's in the hand for beating time.
So at least as long as you don't poke your eye out or something.
Exactly. Yes.
Oh my gosh. See, now I didn't read about that part. That was an interesting tidbit of history.
That's kind of a legendary cautionary tale
There you
for
go.
conductors.
So let's talk about what a conductor does. I mean, you're standing up there and when the orchestra is playing, but it starts before that. So
Absolutely.
let's talk a little bit about what the scope of what a conductor is involved in. First of all, selecting music, I presume?
Absolutely. Yes. And usually when I'm selecting music, I often do it around a theme of some kind. Sometimes we do concerts of just great works, and so then I just choose, kind of my favorite things.
There you go.
But once you choose the repertoire, then you start to study the score, and this all happens way before a rehearsal starts. I mean, the conductor needs to know what everyone is doing, what every instrument in the orchestra is doing when they come in. Instrumentalists might sit there with 20 measures of rest, and while they're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, if they lose count. But as a conductor, you need to be able to look at that instrumentalist then at the end of their 20 bars and say, and here's where you come in.
And that's called cueing.
That is called, good for you, have done your homework.
I have been trying.
Yes,
but
good for you.
Cueing is bringing in the different groups
Yes.
when they're ready to rejoin.
Right. And, studying the score tells you when are you going to need to cue various instruments. What is the overall scope of the piece? What is the shape? Does it kind of build to the middle and then back off again toward the end of the piece? Does it, there are lots of things that you look at. You need to know balance of instruments and how loud they can play. Just because a brass section is marked forte or fortissimo, if it's a big section, yes, you want that. But if there are parts that are being played by the winds that are much softer, or if it's a choral section, I mean, one trumpet will obliterate an entire choir. If they
I think I've heard that happen.
Yes. And, so you need to know those things to be able to say, and it's also very effective that you get the most out of your rehearsals if the conductor marks the parts for the players ahead of time.
Oh, wow.
Before they're even handed.
So see, and this is something that I've admitted I have no musical ability whatsoever, so I don't really know when you're looking at a piece of music. Your score is like everybody, whereas each instrument section has just their
own part.
Music.
Yes.
So that's like really a huge document, I would imagine.
It is. It's an orchestral score can be like this, and it may have 20 individual staffs on it with the piccolo and the flute and and you're seeing all of that go by at once. So when you watch an orchestra, it tends to you tend to see the conductor turning pages frequently because you might only have 5 or 6 measures on a page. So that's going to go by pretty quickly, as is the next page, and then you turn the page, and
So you're like a traffic cop in some respects, because you're making sure who stays out when they're supposed to and who comes in. Also the loudness, the softness.
Yes.
The tempo, how fast.
The type of articulation, whether it's legato and very smooth, whether it's staccato and the notes are very short. The phrasing, where are you going to, and then backing off. If there are three of the same note right in a row, they cannot be played the same way. They're either going somewhere or they're going away from somewhere.
That's an interesting concept. Again, I hear it and I like it, but I had no idea the effort to make that happen. It must be very difficult at times when you're conducting a new orchestra you don't know. Is that difficult when it's a group of new people?
Well, it is, only in the sense that we don't know each other. I don't know their sound. I don't know their, traditions, conventions. They don't know me. And even with the Washington Symphony, the first couple of rehearsals, I could tell they were like, okay, we don't know her, but we'll play for her. And by the third rehearsal, it's like, okay, you know, they know me, I know them, and it's really been an enjoyable experience preparing for this upcoming concert.
So let's just take a step off of that, because they were used to Hugo Eycash, Professor Eycash, as the conductor, and now there's you. Now, is there something that's consistent about the way conductors conduct? Are there certain gestures? Are there certain things that are always the same no matter who the conductor is? Or do you kind of ad lib?
Well, there are certain things that are common to conducting in general. Other things, other gestures are going to be unique to each conductor. But the gestures, for instance, for the various time signatures.
And I think we have some graphics about that. I asked them to bring I sent some graphics so that they would kind of show the movement.
Sure.
So talk about that a little bit.
Okay. So let's say we are in 2/4 time, 2 beats to a measure. When you're conducting the first beat, always, no matter what time signature you're conducting, the first beat is always down. That's why they call it the down beat.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
And the first beat of the measure tends to be the strongest as well.
Okay.
So they have the down and then up, like that. That's
I think we have
2, 1, 2.
Got it.
Yes. Then if there are 3 beats in a measure, the gesture is down, out for 2, and up for 3. So it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. That's it.
Okay,
yes.
I'm going to practice.
Yes. And then if you're beating 4, then 1 again is down, 2 comes into the center of your body, 3 goes out, and 4 goes up. So the 4 pattern is 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Is it always just one hand? Because I see
not at all. Yes, you're a very good student. You are getting to the more advanced level.
Okay.
I should say too, no matter what pattern you are conducting, you don't just start with the downbeat. There is always a preparatory beat that gives the musicians the tempo. This one little gesture has to show the tempo, the style, the articulation, and the dynamic level.
Wow.
So if you are starting, let's say the piece is starting very softly and it's legato, and the tempo is about like that. You have to think that, and then you're giving, let's say it's in 4/4 time, you give beat 4 as the prep, and then everybody will start together. And it's good to breathe on that prep as well, because most of your instruments a lot of your instruments are going to need to breathe. Singers need to breathe. And even if you're playing an instrument that doesn't require wind, if you're playing a string instrument, percussion, you should still breathe to start that phrase. So if I'm going to be conducting this, and the tempo is 1, 2, 3.
There you go.
Like that. If it's a big forte piece, very marcato, that has to be shown here. So if it's a little, I'll do a little faster. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1,
Holy
2.
cow.
Yeah, and that prep shows that. If the piece was 1, 2, 3, 4, and you went, that's not conveying that at all.
Absolutely.
So that prep has to convey all of those things so that the musicians know, as they're taking that breath, the tempo, the style, the dynamic, the articulation, all of that is conveyed in that one motion. And I've worked with choral conductors in particular, who when they do the prep, they also do this with their
open
hand.
Their hand? Oh, to encourage the
that
vocals.
hand looks like you're taking that breath, and that communicates that to the group that they're working with.
So you're kind of not only conducting but coaching in some respects.
Absolutely.
Reminding people the things they have to do to get ready to perform, reminding them what they have to do as far as keeping time with each other and the groups. You've given me a whole new appreciation for what's going on there.
Well, and bringing in the left hand, you asked about the left hand, that is a whole coordination thing.
Sure.
You will see conductors mirror, which means that both hands are doing the same thing. That happens some, but usually the left hand is doing, if there's a crescendo, if the music is to get louder, you've got the right hand is giving the pattern, the left hand is showing to get louder, to get softer. Left hand often gives the cues.
I was going to say.
And the cue requires a prep as well.
Oh,
you
okay.
can't just look at that clarinet player and go, do it now. If let's say they have to play on beat 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. You give the cue, the prep on 2, and you cue on 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1.
There you go.
So you breathe, and then you bring them in on 3.
I have to tell you that I think I could learn the gestures, but the whole rhythm and being able to, no, I'm serious. It's very impressive that there is, I would never have imagined there was so much that went into the movements that are being made by a conductor.
Yes.
So is it more difficult to conduct certain types of music than others?
I think probably as people are first starting to learn conducting, one of the most difficult things for them, by far the most difficult thing to do is to divorce the left hand from the right hand and get that independence. But in terms of the type of music that's more difficult, I think music with changing meters, so that part of the time you're in 4, and now all of a sudden there are 2 measures in 3, and then there's a measure of 2, and then it goes back to 4. So you have to have that in your head.
Holy cow.
There are even more difficult things where the 8th note is the unit of rhythm when you're used to the quarter note being. So let's say if there's a measure of 4, 4, and then a measure of 3, 8, and then a measure of 2, 4, it would look like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2.
Oh my!
So more contemporary. You don't see that in Mozart. I mean, the older music from the classical era, and even much of the Romantic era music, they kind of pick a meter and stick to it.
Sure.
But more contemporary music can be all over the place. I mean, there are pieces where every single measure is a different meter.
Wow.
And so that's very challenging for a conductor. Another thing that is challenging is conducting recitative, which is what you get in something like...
Repeat that again?
Recitative.
Recitative.
Yes, recitative is if you go to an opera and there are songs that they sing, that's an aria. But then if there is like faster, almost like talking, it's the musical equivalent of talking.
Oh, okay.
And there's just some chords underneath it. If it's a keyboard player, if it's somebody playing the harpsichord or something, usually the harpsichord player will play along with and know when to chord because they have all the words there. But if it's a larger ensemble that's playing under the recitative, the conductor has to cue it. And that could be really tricky because you go with the singer and you know when they get to this one word, that's where this happens. And then another word, this happens. And then, but you have to stay within the beat pattern too, so the rest of the orchestra knows where you are.
Right.
Because they might have, that many measures of rest where the recitative is happening, and then all of a sudden they have to play, and then you bring them in. So that's challenging.
Given everything you're talking about, how long does it take to become proficient as a conductor?
Well, that's a great question. I'm still becoming proficient as a conductor. Okay. No, it's true. You can study conducting and then study advanced conducting. The way to really become a good conductor is to get in front of groups. Good. I mean, the more that you work with a group, the more you learn. So it's an interesting kind of a symbiotic relationship, because I know the musicians are sitting there expecting the conductor to know exactly what they want.
Sure.
And it's up to us as a conductor to be able to communicate that. And every time I do a rehearsal, there will be things, I'll analyze the rehearsal afterwards and I'll think, well, that didn't work very well.
Yeah.
So then you have to kind of fix it.
Well, let's talk a little bit real quickly about the fact that you're a female conductor and there aren't very many of you around. And I did find an article in the Pittsburgh Magazine that discussed you and 3 others who were here. So that's something that you and I talked about before the show a little bit, that there are more and more women who are starting, but it tends to be more choral conducting versus orchestral.
It has been in the last, say 40 years that you saw women conducting choirs and there were more men conducting bands and orchestras, although men also did bands and orchestras. But the female conductor for an orchestra was very rare. And one of the first ones in the United States, Joanne Falletta, she does the Buffalo Philharmonic now. She's done some others. The first woman in the United States to really have a big career conducting internationally is Maren Alsop. Most recently, she was the conductor of the Baltimore Symphony.
Okay.
She studied with Leonard Bernstein, and he very early on recognized that she had it.
So you're going to be conducting the Washington Symphony Orchestra. I think we're going to put up the Fun and Games poster. That's kind of like the logo for that. Talk a little bit about that. Did you get to pick any of that music, or was that all selected?
Hugo actually selected most of it. There were a few things that I did suggest and that we are doing. And it is really going to be fun music. You'll hear some sort of classical things like Entrance of the Gladiators, which is what you tend to think of circus music.
Okay.
There are cartoon music, Meet the Flintstones.
Okay.
There's What's Up at the Symphony, which I think so many of us learned classical music as kids from watching Bugs Bunny.
Cartoons.
And these are cartoons, you bet.
Right.
And so it's some of the music that was used in those cartoons that
Right.
is instantly recognizable. We have really well-known pieces like Take Me Out to the Ball Game. We have some...
Well, we're going to have a guest narrator, Bill Cameron.
Bill Cameron,
And
yes.
we have South Hills Children's Choir singing.
Yes, and they're going to sing some really wonderful things that are... It's just all really kind of upbeat music. There's a big suite overture by Danny Elfman of music from Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Pee Wee Herman, that's great movie music. One of the pieces that South Hills Children's Choir is singing is Baba Yetu, which is from a video game.
Wow.
So it's really enjoyable music, all with tied together with the theme of fun and games.
Cool.
But they'll hear a little of everything.
And here's the thing, we have been talking away, and I wish we would have booked a longer program because we're getting to the end already. Can you believe it?
That went so fast.
And I know it went so fast. And I think it's been a very interesting topic, the art of conducting. They say the conductor really is not the one who is the showman, but on the other hand, you bring out the best in everyone to make it a good show.
Well, yes. And what the conductor does really is all before the performance.
Right.
I mean, yes, I'm standing up there for the performance and leading it, but all the work has really been done at that point, and it's just up to the musicians to share that music with the people who are there to listen.
So we have to wrap up. I want to thank you so much for coming. I want to encourage people to maybe look up the WSO, come to the Fun and Games concert, and see Dr. Medley conduct. Thank you very much for joining us for this episode of Exploring the Arts Around Us. I think it's been an interesting topic. I hope everyone will be inspired to learn more about the symphony and conducting. Thank you very much for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Everyone, we're going to wrap up and say goodbye now, and I hope that everyone enjoyed learning about the art of conducting. Thank you.